Good afternoon to all. I am Hilde Blomme, Deputy CEO of Accountants Europe, and our event is going to start now. And please, Salvatore, go ahead with your introductory remarks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome everybody. It is a great pleasure to open this event. A global solution for auditing the less complex entities, how to make it work. We will continue collaborating with International Auditing and Assurance Standard Board and Accountants in Europe in hosting this event. And we look forward to coordinating our response to this special draft. This coordination, in my opinion, will help ensure that the European profession present, as far as possible, a unified and comparing response. This project, I think, has its origin here in Europe. Concerns about the scalability of international standard of auditing were fair in Europe. Some European Union's member states, such as Belgium, were so concerned that they create auditing standard for SMEs. And the professional accountancy organization in the Nordic countries, led by the Nordic Federation, were at the forefront of debate about the possible need for an auditing standard for SMEs. This leadership by our Nordic friends has culminated in Kai Morten Hagen, technical director and then Norsk revisor for any foreign Norwegian Institute of Public Accounting, being appointed chair of the International Accounting Standard and National Standard Board, International Standard Auditing for Less Complexity Task Force. Kai, is a pleasure and privilege having you as the main course today's event. May I congratulate you on your recent reappointment to the International Accounting Standard and International Auditing and Standard Assurance Board. Now, where does IFA stand in this debate? As you know very well, the European Federation for Accountants and Auditors for SMEs is the big or the main voice for small and medium-sized accounting practice in Europe. Our SMMPs know very well the needs of SMEs, since they and no other are their main advisor. We know very well the language, no? The language and the needs, no? As I told you. If I believe this project to be the most important project of the International Auditing and Assurance Standard Boards in this Clarity project over a decade ago, no? In the assurance space, we consider it as important as the development of the European Sustainability Reporting Standard is to the reporting space, no? We believe the timely development of a standard law, international standard of auditing for less complexity is critical to the future of SME audit in Europe. Hence, we are raising our big voice on these issues, and we strongly support the International Auditing and Assurance Standard Board effort and uploading both for its intent as well as the highlight consultative process, including event like this one. IFA responds robustly in the 2019 discussion paper you can see in our webpage. Let me end by sharing a few key points from our summary of key positions that we published in June of this year. First, assurance provides many benefits to SMEs and their stakeholders, including building trust and confidence in the quality of published financial and sustainability information, as well as serve as a check on accounting system and record, provide useful advice to management and improve internal culture. We made a specific survey about this key point in the past, and you can see it in our webpage too. We, IFA, recommended that European Union and local regulators should educate the markets as to these benefits so that the SMEs make and enforce choices to whether to have an audit or some other assurance on their financial statement. Second, international standards on auditing are insufficiently scalable and proportional for use in the audit of a SMA or an SMA or less complex entity, as they drive that cost with little corresponding benefit in terms of audit quality. No? We recommended the timely development of a standard audit standard for the audit of SMEs or less complex entity based on the same fundamental principles as the international standard on auditing that is recognized in European law. It is our principal recommendation for our colleagues, for our profession, for our stakeholder or authorities for the future. We will continue working in this way. For IFA is very important this point. We will in touch with our colleagues and the other professional accounting organization. Of course, in conclusion, IFA is highly supportive on this project. Why we are co-hosting this event today and will respond to the exposure draft. Thank you so much for your attention. Please, you have the floor, Hilde.
Many thanks, Salvatore, for this nice introduction. A few words from Accountancy Europe. For those that have just tuned in, I am Hilde Blomme, the Deputy CEO of Accountancy Europe, and we are also very happy to welcome you to our joint webinar on a global solution for auditing less complex entities, or LCEs, as I am sure we will hear this being referred to during this webinar. Accountancy Europe actually has a very long history on SME and or LCE audit. We did already a few years ago in early 2018, for instance, with the publication on rediscovering the value of SME audits. We also did a Cogito paper on simplifying auditing standards for small or non-complex entities, exploring possible solutions. That was in April 2018, and we did an event on that in May 2018. And as we see a link between actually such audits and audit exemption thresholds, often it is said that those audit exemption thresholds are increased because of a lack of an appropriate standard for SME audits or LCE audits. We actually, since 2006, have been tracking those exemption thresholds, and we also have done multiple updates of that survey over the years. We obviously also responded to the IAASB discussion paper from April 2019. Then it really became very tangible that we would be on the path that we're on right now. And obviously, we will also respond to the current consultation. So that's really why we are thrilled to have this event today with the FAA and with the IAASB to hear from our panelists, but also to hear from all the participants we have at this event, more than 100 already for the moment. And we very much appreciate the quality of the ED and also all the efforts that have gone into getting us at this stage. And we can assure you we actually hear a huge amount of interest in this project and what is being put forward. But the real work is being done at the IAASB and especially by Kai Morten Hagen. Kai Morten, we are really very happy to have you with us as chair of the IAASB LCE task force. We know your day job is at the DNR, or Norwegian member body. Maybe they don't have that much time anymore for you at this present moment, but we are happy that you will introduce us to the proposals. But before we get there, just a few housekeeping matters. So this event is being recorded, and so it will be posted on our website very soon after this event. We encourage you, when we get to the Q&A session, to actually raise your hand if you want to ask a question. And then Kai and Amy Fairchild from the IAASB will moderate that session, and they will then call your name and bring you in. We will make sure that when you are called to ask your question, your microphone will be unmuted. But if you speak, please put on your video, your camera, so that we can see you. We might not be able to answer every question. We might not be able to bring everybody in, but we hope we can deal with as much as possible. And we ask you and thank you for your understanding for potentially not being able to bring all of you in. So with that, Kai, please go ahead and get us into your proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilde and Salvador, for the introductions. I think I would start by thanking you both for the support and the efforts that's been done by both organizations. I think without the work being done by both Accountants Europe and EFAA, we may not have been in the position we are right now, discussing, having a discussion on an actual ED. So it is very helpful to have that support and also get the detailed input. I think as you both introduced, saying this is a topic that's been higher on our lists, and you also both referred to the 2019 discussion paper, which is the basis of what we're doing now. The 2019 discussion paper, it came based on the calls for action. What we saw was that the ISAs were becoming more and more complex, and it become more difficult to use the proportionality being built into the scalability and proportionality that's built into the standards. Based on that, also you saw that there was jurisdictional standards being developed around the world, and there was started to be a risk of fragmentation. Currently, we have more than 130 jurisdictions using the ISAs, and fragmenting what we have as global audit standards would not be of benefit for any of us. So the call we saw based on the discussion paper was that there is a need for a global solution to address the risk of fragmentation. What came back to us was that there were two different projects being developed based on that. One was around the way standards are written. They're written in a the language is complex, it's difficult to understand. So we have a CUSP project, which is complexity, understandability, proportionality, and scalability, which is a project that goes alongside with this one and is developing drafting guidelines on how we are to write standards going forward. One of the comments that, on the discussion paper, we asked for feedback on what our preferred approach should be going forward. Should we write a separate standard using the ISAs as a framework? Should we develop something from scratch? There was also a call for rewriting all the ISAs. With the risk of fragmentation we saw of global or jurisdictional standards being developed, there was a call for a global solution, and there is urgency. And if we are to rewrite all the standards, that would take many, many years, and we would it would also become very difficult to rewrite them and addressing the scalability and proportionality concerns that were there. So then we agreed to develop a separate standard. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So how did we go about to do this? Some of our strategic objectives in IWSB is to be more responding to the calls or urgent calls for action that's been developed and shown by all the users. And so this is building on some of the strategic objectives we have. So we agreed last summer to develop a separate standard. We've done that on what you could say being a very accelerated basis from our usual projects. We committed to doing a more agile approach. So the standard we have developed so far, the ED, we know it's by no means are perfect by now, but we are at the stage where we need the input. We need the input to say, is this what can be something that can be used, and what more or less would you need in order to have a usable solution? Through the development of the standard, we utilized a reference group to get some real-time feedback. In that reference group, we had different stakeholder groups. We had users or practitioners. We had regulators. We also had some academics and also methodology providers to get feedback as we do the development, and not have the ordinary approach of developing everything and then the first time anyone sees the ED is when it goes out. So we've done it a bit differently. And that helped us enormously in order to develop the ED in a year's time. We also been innovating in how we're designing the standard. As you can see, we've written it in a different way than what we've done in the ISAs to try to address some of the concerns that was raised. So if we go to the next slide. So what's the background of our standard? When we as IAASB agreed to do this, it was clear that it has to be high quality audit. The quality of these of engagements being performed by this standard has to be the same, at least the same as done under the ISAs. So it's not about doing less work. It's not about obtaining less evidence, but it's about doing the right thing. What we did, what we've developed is a separate standalone standard as an alternative to the ISAs to be used for audits of the type of entities that we have scoped in the authority section, those that we have agreed on that this could be relevant for. So it's a separate standard. It should include everything that you need in order to perform an audit. There are no references or links back to the ISAs. So if there is an area where there is no requirements or the topic is not covered in the separate standard, you should not be in the standard, as there may not be the requirements necessary to obtain reasonable assurance. So that was the next item on our list. Based on the discussion or based on the feedback from the discussion paper, it was clear it needs to be reasonable assurance, the same level of assurance as we currently have in the ISAs. And there was agreement that it should be based on the same principles as we have in the ISAs today. It should not be starting from a complete blank sheet of paper and develop an alternative approach. So that leads us to how we went about doing this. As you see from the last bullet on this list, what we've done is try to identify the requirements that are proportionate to the circumstances of an audit of an LCE. We've done that by trying to identify what the core procedures or core requirements in the ISAs are currently, and then build that into the standard by writing it in a different way than we currently have. So it's identifying core principles or requirements from the ISAs and then building it by the way that we agreed on developing the standard itself. But not to be mistaken, it's about quality audits. It's not about an audit light, so to say. It's to be proportionate to the circumstances in an audit of an LCE. So if we go to the next slide, when can it be used? If you think back to some of the earlier discussions we had, and when this is discussed, many of the times we've been referring to SMEs or small, we've been using having size matters on it. The applicability or scope, who can use the standard, has been one of the most difficult questions to solve. And the reason for us having to switch to LCE, less complex entities, was that if you're doing an international or global standard, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to agree on size limits. What we've done is also to see, okay, if you're doing an audit, if it were completely based on size, you could have small entities being really complex, but you could also have larger entities being less complex. So in a way, the audit itself would be driven more out of the complexity of what you're doing rather than the size. We are recognizing that when this is to be implemented in different jurisdictions, some jurisdictions have indicated that they will add quantitative criteria, and I think that's perfectly fine and probably something you need to do in jurisdictions to scope in who can use this standard, but doing that on a global level was very difficult for us. So what we've developed, the authority, as you've seen from the ED, in a way is divided in two parts. First, we say that there are some entities that are specifically prohibited, or there's some types of entities where you're prohibited from using this standard. The first one is for listed companies. If you're listed according to the ISAs, you will have additional requirements in the ISAs already today, and you will have to report on key audit matters. There's also public interest and so on in them, so that we agreed that we should not develop a solution for audits of listed companies. They are more complex than the ones not being listed. Then the next one, classes of entities with public interest characteristics. This was in a way developed. There are another, or below the listed category, there is also another level of entities that has public interest in them, but not the public interest being the difficulties, but there are those type of entities that may also have additional complexities. If you have deposits from the public, if you provide insurance, post-employment benefit, or collective investment vehicles, there is also some complexity in them that we agreed not to address in the standard. This category was based on some of the work that IASPA was doing when they were grappling whether to include the public interest entities or what they would, and they ended up using something similar to this, public interest characteristic, when they were developing this in the IASPA framework. We know that they're currently considering updates and changing to that approach, and we also need to follow up on that approach to see if and how that would affect the authority of this standard. The next one is audits of group financial statements. It is an area where we have received a lot of feedback, both prior to releasing the ED, but also after that. Audit of group financial statements should not automatically be scoped out as it currently is. And we have in the explanatory memorandum that goes with the ED, there is a whole section on group audits asking for feedback if they were to be scoped in, and if they're so to be scoped in, if they how we should do that. So it is something we know that there are different views on. But currently, group financial statements are scoped out of using the standard. That being said, subsidiaries may use this standard if they otherwise qualify as less complex entities. This is just for the group financial statement, so to say. So you can use it on the subsidiary, the audit of the subsidiaries. Then there may also be some additional jurisdictional limitations where they say, like I said earlier, they may be added quantitative criteria to say if you're above a certain size limit, you may not be able to use the standard, or other means of adding a specific prohibitions. So if you say that I'm not specifically prohibited from using the standard, then there is a consideration that needs to be done based on qualitative criteria. The qualitative criteria we've developed are indicators, are trying to be indicators of complexity, and what we used in order to decide what content to include or not to include in the standard. So it's around the entity itself, how it's organized, use of IT systems and so on, but also around accounting estimates. What we've done is saying if it is a complex accounting estimate, you may not, this standard does not have all the requirements for that, and you should not be in the standard, and you should be in the full ISOs. So it's all of these are indicators of complexity, and based on a judgment that you would do, you would then say, am I or am I not less complex according to this evaluation? And you would need to document that in your file. You would do a documentation when you have the engagement acceptance continuance procedures, but have to do a stand back of that after you identified and assess your risk to see if you still think you should be in the standard. In addition to what we've done, by having the specific prohibitions and the qualitative characteristics, firms may add their own policies and procedure to say how they should go, when you should use this standard. They may have certain risk profiles they want the standard not to be used on, or I think also firms may say it's below, or the standard can be used on engagement below a certain audit hours is a suggestion that I've heard, but that's not anything we can have in the standard itself, but it's how firms sometimes operationalize some of these requirements. So they cannot modify the prohibitions that are there. They can add and be more restrictive on what is in the standard. So that's how you would go about deciding if you can use the standard or not. If we go to the next slide, as I said, we agreed on that the standard should be based on the same concepts as we have in the ISOs, and that's what we've done. So it's a risk-based approach. It's principle-based. What we've done, so to say, a bit differently is that we've tried to be more specific on focusing on the expected output. So when we've written the requirements, we've tried to make it more clear what's the expected output of the requirement itself. I think some of the feedback we heard on the ISOs is that they may be a bit open, and it leaves too much wondering what you really should do. And then you look into the application material, which comes with examples on how this could be done. In some cases, this may be seen as expanding on the requirement itself. So we've tried to make the requirement itself more clear, not having to open that box, so to say. So writing it also with an easier language. We tried to write it using the flow of the audit, so that it would be more streamlined and easier to understand the whole flow itself. We do use the same objectives as we have in the ISOs themselves, but they may be modified a bit to follow the flow of the standard itself. As you've seen, one of the other differences is that we don't have application material, but we have essential explanatory material. And that is developed to give an additional information on content that would be, or a guidance on that is essential to understand and apply a requirement or a concept. So it's very limited on that. We do recognize that there may be a need for more guidance to start using the standard, but we think a better place of doing that is outside the standard itself. We're also looking into how this should be done, and then we're if this is something that we're developing together with others, or how that should be done. But it is something that we're working on to decide how this should be done. But we recognize there is a need for more than just the EM itself. So if we go to the next slide. As you've seen from the ED, the standard is built following the flow of the audit. In a way, it's divided into two parts. The first three parts is more the broad concepts and overarching matters that is relevant throughout the audit itself. And then from part 4 to 9, it goes into the audit itself. So different to what we've done in the ISAs is that we've built some of the, let's say, topical ISAs back into the flow of the audit to avoid repetition and saying the same thing, almost the same thing multiple times. That would also lead to considering, is this the same or is it different than what we have in the other standard? So we've done that a little bit differently by using the flow of the audit itself. The other part that's also a bit different is part 9 around reporting. We had multiple different goals at trying to define what the reporting should be. The audit report that's currently there, the unmodified report, we've mandated the form and content of the report in the standard itself, and you can only depart to comply with lower regulation or to have a modification and so on. And we used tables to present the requirement related to a modification or other matter, and then including the topic, what could be changed, and then how the text would change in the report itself. There's also a supplemental guide available on the reporting itself. So if we go to the next slide, I think that's my last slide before turning back. As you've seen from the ED, there are about 20-something questions specifically asked on the ED. You can group them into these type of areas. The first one being the content, flow, and structure of the standard. What we need feedback on is what we've included in the standard. Is this what you need? Is it useful to use it on the flow of the audit? Is there content that we included that would not be relevant for an audit of an LCE? Or is there something missing? The second one here is around the authority and the scope. Is what we've developed usable, and can it be operationalized, and also the structure of who can add in, like the jurisdictions can add in additional requirements. And then it's, as I said, a separate section in the EM around the exclusion of the group audits of group financial statement. As I said, we are open to changing our position, but that would be then needing to be based on the feedback we get on the ED itself. The next one is around, there are some additional areas where we need feedback. One of them is transition. If you start using the separate standard and you identify that you need to move out of this standard, we've included material on that in the EM, but we also would need to know if that is enough or what you need to have in addition to help. As I said, implementation guidance, there needs to be more. We're working on that, trying to identify, but hearing what you would need in addition to implement, and if there are any obstacles of implementation. And then the last one here around maintenance of the standard. How we've developed this is saying that it will be updated in line with the other ISA projects when they're revised. We have had discussions around having a stable platform, similar to IFRS for SME, but there are pros and cons of both approaches. So what would be your view on that? It's also helpful. But in addition to all these specific questions, the important one is, can the standard be used? Does it include what you need? And will it be used? If you're allowed to use it, will you use it? And will jurisdictions allow? So those are the big questions that are out there in addition to the specific ones that we have. So thank you. And I think I would concern.
Thank you very much, Kai. That was really a very good run through the ED. Without further ado, I will come to our panel now. We will change the order slightly, and I would first like to introduce to you Burçak Inel from the European Banking Federation. She is Director of Financing Growth, and as a user of audited financial statements, also of less complex and smaller entities, we're very interested in hearing your views. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for the flexibility with regard to the timing. I will stay online, but after my, but I have to step out and come back. So in the European Banking Federation, we represent all the countries of Europe. Our members provide finance to SMEs both through bank loans and also by providing the services that are needed for them to access capital markets. So it's in that context that we're looking at the current proposal. My remarks will be, I think, more of a general nature to provide a bit of the context, how the current evolution might affect SMEs' access to finance, but also maybe other interlinkages like sustainability reporting. My first point is that SMEs are really important, as we all know, and what they need is something adapted to their indeed complexity and skills, capacities, while retaining the same principles. And by that I mean we like the idea on the table, which is principle-based and risk-based. I think the overall approach sounds very good because ultimately, as users of the information coming from SMEs, both financial and, by the way, non-financial reporting more and more in the future, banks and other stakeholders need to rely on this information. So that's my first point. The second thing is what the SMEs currently have as a relationship with the financial system. Now, from the bank side, I want to say that for the moment, bank financing does not seem to be a top obstacle for SMEs, even in the COVID period. And that doesn't mean that the financial sector needs to be complacent, but it's an important plus. According to the latest ECB SAFE survey, the much bigger difficulty for SMEs is finding skilled labor and customers. And access to finance was among the less important ones, and the availability of banking loans seems to be continuing to rise. And may I say also in this context that we are in a partnership with Accountancy Europe, and we're very grateful to their efforts, along with 10 other associations, now actually 12 other associations, for a cooperation, for a network, bringing SMEs together with all those who are providing professional services to SMEs, along with the SMEs themselves and the guarantee institutions. And this is a bottom-up project, and its main target currently is post-COVID, helping the data coming from SMEs to make sense to those who will be using the data. And the first such roundtable will be probably in Romania in the first quarter of next year. Now, before I say a few more specific words about the standard, I also want to say that for sustainability, you will see that SMEs reporting of non-financial information will become more and more important, and not just for the listed ones, but also for the unlisted ones. We expect that a lot of SMEs will have to do voluntary reporting if they want to remain a part of the important supply chains. And they're going to be in a very tight spot, because some of them will need to get data from others from outside the EU. And so they will be actually squeezed. And in order for this not to become a credit crunch for the SMEs, we absolutely must make sure that the data is available to them, and it's something that they can report. And there I would say financial and non-financial, I see a link, because the capacity of the SMEs will be better if they're able to go through an audit process. I think that will carry on to all aspects of the reporting they're expected to do. And finally, on the specific standard, as I announced at the very beginning, we don't have a very granular view on this, other than to say that overall we like the international standardization. Obviously, a lot of our members are also active internationally, So despite the big differences, the economic and structural differences around the world, we agree that the idea of an international standardization in this case is useful. As I said earlier, the overall approach sounds very reasonable. We think that the standard could harmonize audit regulation in Europe, which is also a good thing. The only 2 points that I received as feedback from members so far, where they are asking for attention, is, as you would expect, on the thresholds, because they don't want to see those countries with really lower audit limits thresholds are concerned about the threshold rising, and they're also asking about the micro companies. And of course, there's a concern that the cost for audits for these companies shouldn't rise too much. With that, I will stop. I'm available for the Q&A later. So even if you don't see me on screen, I will be listening. Thank you.
Many thanks, Burçak, for your comments and for your support and overall constructive comments. So we are advancing in our panel, and our next panelist is Mark Babington. Mark, welcome to you as well. Mark is Executive Director, Regulatory Standards at the UK Financial Reporting Council. And Mark, obviously, we would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your nomination as new ISPA board member. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. The subject that we're discussing, the LCE consultation, is an interesting one because it contains a number of lessons, I think, for standard setting more widely. So firstly, I think that Kai and the team at the IAASB are to be congratulated for demonstrating that it is possible to set standards at pace. And indeed, what we've seen from the board with the work that they have done is that they have really demonstrated it's possible to develop a high quality document and get it out there and consult with stakeholders on a much more timely basis. And given that I spent sort of 2.5 years working closely with the monitoring group on the question of standard setting reform, I think this is an excellent way of working. I think the other thing that we should look at as well in this standard is that the way in which it's drafted is a lot simpler and crisper than the language traditionally used in ISAs. And I think, and certainly the more sort of I look at the proposal, there are wider lessons for the way in which standards are set and indeed how we make them more accessible by drafting them perhaps along the lines of the principles used in this standard. But I think the standard itself faces a challenge, and obviously the IAASB is there to develop standards that can be used in any jurisdiction, and so therefore it has to develop them in a way that creates flexibility. And that means that the LCE standard will have a use in some jurisdictions, but perhaps not in others. And by that I mean that using the UK as an example, we have an audit exemption threshold that means that the vast majority of entities in the UK do not actually require an audit. I realise that some do on a voluntary basis, maybe as a condition of borrowing or to satisfy member requirements. But in a sense, we have scoped out many of the less complex entities from having an audit in any case, and therefore I'm not minded at the moment to recommend its adoption and use in the UK. I can see that it would work very well in other jurisdictions. So the example's been given to me of Hong Kong, where every entity requires an audit as part of being able to demonstrate, compliance with tax requirements and so on. And of course, the standard would bring something there where there are a very large number of entities. I think a couple of other points from me. I have a concern about a standard that may lead to a two-tier market. I I do have a concern very much, as you'd expect from a regulatory perspective, about the importance of high quality audit. And I do worry that a standard which perhaps means that users had less of an understanding of the ISAs, less of an understanding of the assurance framework, would over time lead to a two-tier market. And I don't think that that would be a good outcome. Indeed, one of the challenges from a UK perspective is that we're trying to look at how we expand the diversity of the audit market and bring more people into that market. And I don't believe a two-tier approach would lend itself well to that. And I think the other thing, and I know that there has already been outreach undertaken, is will users understand what they're actually getting with an LCE audit? Obviously, the assurance that's provided by the ISA regime is very much seen as a gold standard. Would this be seen as a step down from that gold standard? And as a result, would users have perhaps a lower degree of confidence in the information, the quality of the information that they were being offered? And therefore, I think the board has some work to do to make sure that it understands the needs of the user community, and indeed how this standard could be used in jurisdictions to make sure that it was properly supporting, properly underpinning public confidence in high quality information for decision making. So for me, it's very much a story of two halves. One, that it has demonstrated a very responsive approach by the IAASB, and that standards can learn from the approach that's been followed in developing this document. But I think in developing a global standard that can be used in any jurisdiction, one of the challenges will be that in some jurisdictions there will already be legal or regulatory provisions, which means that the LCE standard is not necessarily needed. But I think it's been a helpful debate for us to have, and it will continue obviously through the rest of the consultation period. We will of course be submitting our own comment letter to the IAASB along with everyone else, and I am interested obviously in hearing questions from people who've joined this event today, and I look forward to our continued discussion. So with that, Hilda, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Maybe a slightly different perspective, but nonetheless a very interesting and much appreciated one. We will go to our last panelist. Our last panelist is Monica Stefan. She is a senior audit partner at Soter & Partners in Romania, and she is also a member of the IFAC SMP advisory group, and also very active in her institute and the Chamber of Financial Auditors, CAFAR, in Romania. Monica, thank you very much for agreeing to join us, and the floor is yours. Oh, we cannot hear her.
Micro.
I thought someone will take care of the microphone. So, yeah. Thank you very much for letting me participate in this event together with you and together with such reputable speakers. Actually, you've said so many things. I don't know what I'm going to say right now because you took all of my ideas and my takes on the LCE. But still, I will point out my opinions. I just want to point out that I am here in my capacity as a small practitioner, first of all, and probably as a potential user of LCE if Romania will probably adopt or align to the LCE standard, and if the EU regulations will accept this standard. LCE is quite a challenge. Initially, it was an idea in 2017 to help the small practitioners. Then it was a concept in 2019, pushing to a lot of discussions and opening a Pandora box. And now it's a moving train that has to reach the right station, and we need to make sure that it does. My beginning in audit, I'm just going to make a small parenthesis for those who don't know me. I'm a practitioner in audit for 21 years now. I started audit with KPMG back in 1997, and based on my own professional experience, after I left KPMG and I started my own practice, I discovered the discipline behind the audit. I understood the backbone of audit quality, the philosophy behind a risk-based approach. I passed on ACCA exams, a lot of them. I understood what is the struggle to proportionate the amount of work necessary and relevant to support my audit opinion. And just to touch on something that Kai said earlier, size in audit does not matter or should not matter. The methodology is the one important factor to get to the right results. The current 170 pages of the standards that is proposed today, and the 34 pages on the format of the report and the 20 pages on authoritative guidance prove that in very few pages, 224 pages, you can really do a great job. It is concise, it is clear, it is well written, at least for those that are not native English speakers, and it follows accurately the backbone of audit engagements. So it's a great job done, and I think IASPA got a lot of applause on this project. But also, let's remember that 51% of the IASPA respondents to the initial survey in 2019 voted for a complete review of the standards, and that it was necessary because we all need a little bit of clarity in the applicable standards. Let's be fair, the standards are highly professional and they use a linguistic register that is not easy accessible to everyone, and you need a dictionary along the book to read it. But that's why we have teachers, and that's why we have webinars, and that's why we have professional bodies to take care of the members. So I'm an auditor, I'm skeptical, and for me, this new concept of LCE is not very easy to accept. And the reasons why I don't do that are 6, at least I thought of 6 of them. First of all is the expectation gap. Like Mark said, there's an expectation gap in the market. Small auditors consider, and they were looking for something that will actually decrease the overload, the work overload, and based on proportionality principle, to relieve them of the documentation, the simplification of the risk evaluation model, the simplification of the selection process of the samples and the relevant samples, overall reduce a little bit the documentation overload. And bad luck for them, the standard actually requires sufficient necessary and adequate work to support the reasonable assurance opinion, which in other words is not very different from the ISIS. In terms of the clients, I think many clients consider that less complex entity means less audit work, less audit fees. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not the case, because it takes longer to audit a small company that has no internal control rather than a large entity that has internal control in place and is transparent and, you know, it's comfortable with controls. And for market and investors, I think there's also an expectation gap in the perception of this process. The moment that we are prepared to jump in and create, you know, a parallel standard that is based on the backbone of ISIS, but in a reduced format, this reduction in this very moment of economic fragility may be perceived as a reduction in the quality of the audit. Similarly, and I think Mark also touched on that, when we mention in the audit opinion, audit performed in accordance with the standard for less complex entities, I think that will strongly support a doubt in the mind of the reader that perhaps in case this audit would have been carried out in accordance with ISA, perhaps other issues would have come to his or her attention. So I think doubt and strong and wrong perception will affect the trust of the investors in the auditor's services, which is not good for us. Second thing is the audit separation. I'm also concerned that this standard is actually growing the barriers, or helping to grow the barriers in the market and create a different profession, that of the auditor of the LCE. Already we have a big separation between small companies and large companies. I know the report that was published by the EC Commission in January 2021, which reported that 3.8% of the auditors audit pies in Europe, and the number has decreased from 2015 to 2018 by 35%. And that is a worrying factor. And this average percentage is also maintained in Romania. So now, if we really want to create a separate profession, that of the LCE auditors, I think that these standards will help to this separation. And I don't think that's where we really want to go. And another important regulatory aspect in market separation is that also regulators will have to proportionate the way they are making their inspections and the quality of their observation in terms of the audit files that they will check. Perhaps some of you will say audit of LCE will not go under the monitoring process. Well, maybe it should be taken into consideration, at least to be sure that the auditors are doing the right job. In terms of jurisdictional challenge, I think there are jurisdictions in Europe that use the continental law, where the letter of the regulation is it's very relevant in court. Professional judgment can be exercised up to a certain point that respects the law. Any principal judgment or following the examples of others is not relevant in court, at least not in Romania. So any standard that has to be used, it has to be set by the national setters, and it has to state exactly which entities go under the spectrum of that standard. And I'm referring to LCEs, I'm referring to group audits actually. Group audits, which are a challenge because they are inherently complex. And the auditor should not be the one to decide whether to treat them as LCE or not. What will the auditor do if he is very optimistic, he decides to use the LCE and then decide to convert back to the ISIS because the audit was proven to be, the group was proven to be complex? Or what if the semi-public entities are treated as less complex? Or those entities that are in supply chain, which are forced to use the ISIS instead of the LCE? How will they be treated? How will the banks perceive this audit opinion for them? So I think it's a question of national jurisdiction and the national setters to decide on that. Because if we leave the door to interpretation open to the professional, that will only create confusion and inconsistency in the audit approach. I will have a different view than another professional, and when I'm going to take over the audit, that might be an issue. So transition of the audit from one auditor to another can be another aspect to be developed in this standard, or at least addressed by the standard. Because when I take an audit over and that audit has been done in accordance with LCE standards, and me as a professional, I decided it's a complex entity, it might be an issue if I have to redo procedures on the beginning balances. How will that cost be covered? And how will that be dealt with? Another issue of concern is that the standard, in terms of how it's written, it should describe more the concept of materiality and the connection with the risk evaluation. Because right now materiality is covered in an article which has 4 or 5 paragraphs, and the same issue I think goes for the going concern analysis. SMEs, like my first speaker said, they are important to economy, they are important to finance. So therefore, auditors need to be careful to the audit, because banks can rely on that when they put on finance to the company. So it's important to be aware of the going concern. I think the last aspect that I will touch on will be digitalization of the audit process. This is the main driver to simplify our lives as auditors. And many small auditors nowadays try to go digital, connect at a distance, understand the importance of applications that enable faster data analysis. The today's audit softwares provide already working programs, recommended audit strategies, sample selections based on ISAs, not based on other standards. They use the top quality management standards right now. And since the workflow of audit is basically the same, regardless that is a less complex or a complex entity, the digital file itself can be tailored to the type of entity, and the path of audit will logically follow. So I think the only barrier that SMPs have are the money to finance. So instead of thinking how to create separate standalone standards, perhaps a better solution would be to enable auditors not to use pencil and paper, but think of a modern global platform free of charge, like the COVID vaccine, which is free of charge nowadays, and that will enable a generalized audit approach. As my closing statement, and in my humble opinion, I think that LCE concept should be integrated in the audit reform to come. Together with a new proposed PI definition of ISBA, together with a new upcoming CUSP project, which will explain proportionality, scalability. And I think that also will enable professional judgment to be exercised in a better way, not just to the limit of the letter of the standard. Nowadays, we are going through the fourth industrial revolution, which is driven by climate change and digitalization. The road seems very foggy and very risky. I think it's a matter of social responsibility what we do today, because we plant the seeds that will grow in 20 or 30 years, and the new generation of auditors will prove if we've done good or wrong. For me, at this moment, to be honest, I really applaud the efforts, but what I see is that you give us, the small auditors, a toy to play until the big players decide what to do with sustainability assurance, with taxonomy, and with upcoming challenge of the green. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. I would say a lot of food for thought in what you have said, especially for Kai and the IASB. Thank you very much to all three panelists. We are coming to the next phase of our webinar, and that's the discussion with you, all the participants we have at this event. And just to repeat, for those that were a bit late in joining, so we have now the honor to have Kai and Amy moderate our discussion based on your questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. We will then unmute your mic once Kai has named you as the person he would like to take the question from, and then please put on your camera so that we see you on video. We don't really see hands yet, but we very much encourage you to come forward. And maybe in the meantime, Kai, if you would have any reactions to what the panelists have said, please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilda, and Monica, and for all the comments, or for all of you, from all the comments that or Buchak as well, for all the comments that you've given. As I started, this is our effort at trying to address the concerns that were raised and the comments that we got in the discussion paper. As you saw from how we've developed the standard, we've done it in a different fashion than what we've done in other projects, recognizing that we're not there yet, but we need to get the standard out and to get the views. I have done multiple different outreach sessions so far. There are different views. Some are concerned, some are happy. There are things that we need to do more work on. And there are also challenges that are being posed that we need to further address. So looking at some of the challenges that was posed from the panelist here was around thresholds and the authority that is a big question, and as I said in my introduction, something that we spent quite a lot of time on, and the difficulty, and I think as I said in my introduction as well, recognizing, as Monica said, in jurisdictions, they probably would need to have, in some jurisdictions, would need to have a quantitative size limit on it, but that is not something we can do as a global standard setter. We neither mandate the use of the ISAs, but we cannot mandate the use of this standard. What we develop is standards that can be taken and used in the different jurisdictions. I think also, as you both, Mark and Monica, touched on the perception issue, that there may be perception challenges coming up. We are very aware of that, and that is also partially why we have doubled the time on the ED than we normally have. It's a 6-month exposure period rather than a 3, because we need to do substantial outreach in order to reach all different types of user groups. We need to hear from banks, we need to hear from users or other users of financial statements, regulators, practitioners. We need to hear from the whole community, and also practitioners we ordinarily don't hear from. I think on the regular consultations we have, it's accountancy organizations and the big firms that respond. Here we also need to hear from the S&P practitioners, what they say and how they go about this. So very happy to get those views, and also the difficult questions and comments. I think the difficult comments and questions, that's what driving the best solutions in the end. I think also then to transition, as was posed by Monica, that may be a concern or an area where they might need to do more work on how that should work. It is a challenge, as we said, we identified prior also to releasing the ED, and we have included some material in the explanatory memorandum on that. But I think we also need to look at it from the practical side. If you are to move back to the full ISAs, if you have then if we then have gotten like a mapping and seeing some of the comments we see now is that the standard is more or less the same as the ISAs, has also been said here, that the degree of work that you may need or not need to do in order to transition to the full ISAs depends very much on the topic that makes you that drives the move. So if it is because of an area that's not been included at all in the separate standard, then you may need to do more. If it is an area where you've covered already, there may be less or not that much to do. So it is something we need to look more into. And also, as you touched on, a few of you, that there are many different expectations out there, what this standard may or may not do. As you said, some people are asking for an easier audit to be cheaper. That is not what we've committed to doing. Our work is to do a high quality audit, same level of assurance within the framework of that. What we are aiming at then is trying to have a proportionate application of those framework to the circumstances of an LCE. So our goal has not been to develop an easier audit or a cheaper audit, but a standard that will drive you to focus on the right things. So if we manage doing that by writing the standard in a more direct way, some of the comments we also received so far from on other outreach has been around the amount of documentation may still be the same, but the way you go about to get there may be a bit different. So you can go more directly to the goal. So it's interesting to see where we get to, and I think the reason for having this ED is that we need to hear from all of you, all the comments, all the applause, but also the concerns, and we're very happy to get those. I see the first hand, Monica.
Yes, you'll get enough of me from this event, and for sure you will not invite me to another, but I'm taking full advantage of this moment. So, you know, just to the disappointment, Arnold Schindler, which was the former president, in the ED exposure, he said that actually in 2017, they were looking for something to help the small practitioners. So that the view was to help the small practitioners, and it should be there. I just wanted to tell you two things. One of them is that IFAC is starting a survey into catching out and picking on the points of the practitioners on the standard. And I hope many practitioners will actually respond to this survey, which was made publicly available. And I hope you'll get to hear their points of view and not ignore them, like the 51% respondents to the IFAC survey in 2019. And second of that, just to let you know, is that all the effort to convince the market after the LCE standard will be set in place, it will not be on your shoulders, will be on our shoulders as small practitioners to convince the market on the time that we need to push on them. Secondly, I don't think banks are very interested in how the audit is being developed. They are more interested in the quality of what we do. So whether it is LCE or ISIS, I think what is important is that the auditors do their job well and do their job at the right quality. And to be honest, in the last 20 years, I haven't heard of small practitioners being faulty. I've always heard of big cases that were going wrong, and that's the reason why the standards have been always challenged and always topped up with a very scientific language. I'm trying to lower my hand now and
Okay.
to close the microphone.
Thank you for your comments, and thank you also for mentioning the survey. As I said, we are doing quite a lot of different things to get input. One of them being also that with IFAC have developed a survey to get views from also some of the ones we ordinarily don't hear from. The primary contact is through the outreach sessions as we're currently doing and having the letters, but it's also open for feedback on the survey, because we need to hear can this be used, and what is good, what is bad. I think also just to comment to, you said that we ignored in the discussion paper what people are asking for. I don't think we ignored what we have tried developing a building block principle. It becomes very difficult as we then in a way need to, we have difficulties today agreeing on the authority of a standard as a whole. If we are to develop building block principles, we need in a way to develop do the same type of effort on each and different area where we have the building blocks. So agreeing on what are the drivers of the additional blocks to be added on. It is a concept that probably is easier to do on accounting standards rather than auditing, because this is about complexity of what you're doing and not. So we have tried, but we've not gotten there. And then also the urgency that was posed in the discussion paper. So this is also responding to that. So I think the next hand, Catherine Bagshaw.
Please unmute your microphone, Catherine. We tried to do it, but it seems not to work immediately.
She has to unmute it herself.
You have.
Okay, is that better? Okay, is that better? Okay, is there an echo? No. Okay, good. Okay, good. Thank you. Right, start again. Well, thanks, Kai. Thanks to everyone for your presentations this afternoon. This is an extremely important debate, and we at ICAW, like all of the other professional bodies, are spending a lot of time and effort on this. I've got comment, a different perception from the UK on this. A question for those of you in regulatory roles on the panel, not just Mark, but the others of you in the regulatory roles, and also a question for IAASB. Our engagement, ICAW's engagement with a really very wide range of users, an unusually wide range of users and other stakeholders in the UK over the last 3 months, suggests that there is a strong demand for this standard in principle. Firms of all sizes tell us they really do perform quite a large number of voluntary audits, and ICAW and UK practitioners have long called for a standard of this nature. Now, we think it's important that the right tone is set in this debate. It must be constructive and it must be open, and it's important that none of us prejudge the outcome of this, regardless of our initial impressions. Now, don't get me wrong, we don't underestimate the technical challenges associated with this ED. I would go as far as to say that right now it probably isn't fit for purpose. A lot of work is needed, and it may need re-exposing. IAASB shouldn't shy away from that if that proves to be necessary. We're also aware that this ED doesn't have support in some quarters. Nevertheless, we strongly believe that consultation, when this standard is finalised with a wide range of stakeholders at a national level, is essential in the public interest, and we'd like to be assured from those in regulatory roles that we will get that. We're also to come back to the questionnaire, the IFAC survey. We're delighted to see that. We haven't got long to reply on that now, but hopefully that will gain a good number. What I'm interested in is whether IAASB has given any thought to how it's going to deal with, how it's going to manage the responses on this, because balancing the various interests in this. I heard somebody from one large firm say the other day, even our own firm is all over the shop on this, arriving at a conclusion, deciding what to do. And I just wondered if any thought had been given to that, or might be given to that before these responses start coming in. Thank you.
Yeah, I think as you asked, Catherine, that we are expecting, so to say, a record number of responses, both through the survey, the outreach sessions, and the written responses. And from what you can also hear on this conversation, there are different views. And that is something we need to balance in deciding how to respond to the calls as well. How exactly that will be done is difficult to say, not having all the responses in front of you. In a way, you can also say we need to see if there are jurisdictions that say that they will not use it at all. How will that affect the conversation and the input? So we need to balance that out by saying what can we do at a global level, and then how can this be brought forward? As you said, if there needs to be a second round on this topic, we will do that. We're not pushing through on this. We need to make sure that what we do is fit for purpose and can be used. So currently, the timeline that we are working on is that as you said, the ED is out until the end of January 2022. Our current timeline is that we, in the first half of 2023, aim to finalize the standard. If that ends up being a final standard, or we'll have to re-expose, it's difficult to know without seeing the detailed input we get. And I think, as you said as well, we need to hear in the ED, we need to hear specific and detailed views. If you're saying this does not work, show us what doesn't work, and show us what you want to have done instead. Because the more specific you are, the more helpful it is for us to drive this further. We have been discussing these topics for quite some time, and then we've been grappling different solutions. So we may have considered some of the ideas before, but we need to hear them specifically and how that could drive us forward. Amy, go ahead,
yes,
Amy.
Hi everybody, I'm Amy Fairchild, so I'm a principal at the IAASB working on this project. So, really just echoing what Kai has said about, we are hearing a lot of very, mixed views on certain areas, and so really getting that detail will be really useful. In terms of if something isn't working, as Kai said, just giving us, that detailed steer. One of the things we're looking at, we have quite a long outreach period, and we're already hearing different things, and it's enabling us to have more detailed conversations on some of these areas where we're already seeing these mixed views, and we will continue to do that even after the consultation has closed. So whether it be groups or risk assessment or different transition, and really kind of drill down on these to try and get a steer. But inevitably it is difficult because there are a lot of very mixed views, which is part of, I guess, setting standards at a global level, of course. But yeah, so as much detail as we possibly can get. I know you mentioned the survey as well. So similar to the written consultations, we do have this detailed survey that we just released in the last couple of days that will be open until the middle of January. And that does have, areas for you to give specific detailed comments on things that you feel strongly about, really have those directional. So again, just wanted to plug that survey because that's important for us, because we will be looking at those responses with the same level of detail as the actual written consultation letters that come in.
I think the next hand I see Harun.
Thank you, Kai. I hope you can hear me. First of all, many thanks for your presentation and insights you have given. So we are also at Accountants Europe preparing for our response. We are having nice discussions, interesting discussions. There are 2 points that I would like to raise. Maybe one of them is not for you, but there is a huge interest in this project, that's for sure. But also our members are also looking forward to having discussed project outcomes. So maybe what's going on there about ISAs, as Mark mentioned, will lessons learned from this exercise be reflected somehow on ISAs themselves? And the second thing, most of our members, SMPs, they find IFAC guide to using ISAs to SMEs in SME audits very useful with examples and with the 2 volumes. So I know you were consulting, coordinating with a reference group. So are there any plans to have similar guides, practical guide for this one? Thank you.
Thank you, Harun. I can start addressing your questions and comments, and you can chime in if you have additional comments also, Amy. As you said, and as I introduced, there were 2 projects that was started based on the 2019 consultation. One was the separate standard to address the specific concerns on audits of less complex entities. And there was also then a CUSP project being developed to how to write the standards going forward to avoid the comments getting on the complexity, usability of the standards, and scalability and proportionality. There are 2 work streams working alongside. They are developing, as I said, a guide on how to write the standards. As part of that project, we're not thinking of rewriting all the ISAs as a big bunch, as we've done earlier with the revisions to all the ISAs, as that would take quite a long time, and that would not be the best use of resources currently. But I also, one of the other questions is how will what we're learning here feed back into the ISAs? Yes, I think there will be lessons learned from this based on the feedback we're getting that we can utilize in the ISA projects themselves. So that is something that we need to take into account developing the ISAs going forward. To your specific question on the IFAC SMP guide, that is actually one of our primary suspects and who we're targeting and having discussions with and how to develop additional guidance. As you say, the IFAC SMP guide is seen as very helpful for many practitioners. If a way of adding additional guidance could be to update that guide along with this standard is something that we are currently trying to see if can be done, because that would be, I think, very helpful to the usability of the standard itself.
Okay, thanks, Kai.
And just with regard the LCE reference group, so obviously Kai covered it earlier. It was just a really great way of getting that kind of quick, agile feedback. We're definitely looking as a board at trying to kind of use similar things within our other standard setting projects. So trying to get the kind of, reference groups where it's appropriate and look at, trying to get that feedback earlier on in the process. So this is definitely something that we're trying to do as a board to, more agile, develop standards and to get that feedback earlier. So.
The next hand I see is Paul Thompson.
Hi, Kai. Thank you so much. Great presentation, and it was good to hear from the fireside chat the interventions from Mark, Monica, and Burchak. EFA, just like Accountancy Europe, plans to respond robustly to this consultation. Just as we did previously with the discussion paper. We're very supportive in principle of the project, as Salvador mentioned at the outset. But that being said, of course, we do have some concerns. I won't share all of them with you, but perhaps the primary concern, and this is the one that I think both Mark and Monica mentioned in their remarks, has to do with the perception in the marketplace as to the quality of an audit conducted in accordance with the ISA for LCE vis-a-vis an ISA conducted, an audit conducted in accordance with the full suite of ISA. It's critically important, of course, that the two be seen to have equivalence. I just wonder what plans, if any, the IASB has, and what suggestions the IASB might have for regulators, for professional bodies, in helping ensure a consistent, comprehensive communication around this message that these things are the same, that they deliver the same quality audit.
Thank you, Paul. It is, as you hear from the conversation and the comments coming up, an area that there are quite some views on. As I introduced as well, the perception, it is very much a messaging thing, how we frame it, but also not only we, but as you said, everyone, and how it will be seen. That's why we're also very keen on saying quality audit, same level of assurance. It's not about reducing anything. We are, however, though, recognizing the views coming in and see that this is an area where we need to do some more work as well to deliver that message and how that should be done. And here we're also, we need the help from Accountants Europe, EFAA, and everyone to help spread that message to the regulators and how this would be seen, because I think it influences very much how that the view of that's going. So it is an area we recognize we need to do more work. As one of the areas we need to do more work. We are currently looking into that also to see how that can be messaged and packaged. So, thank you. The next hand I see is from Jose Maria Hinoya.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, I've got a very concrete question about the ED. It's why groups of companies have been exempted from the standard, and it is likely to remove that limitation because they have considered that the groups are complex per se, no matter how it's organized, a group or things about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can take this one. So I think Kai briefly mentioned in his presentation earlier that groups was a big discussion during this, or the audit of group financial statements was a big discussion during the development, and there were a lot of discussions at the board about whether or not the standard should include those requirements and should be allowed to be used. The board ultimately landed on balance with feeling like there was an inherent level of complexity in a group audit that would mean that the standard wouldn't be appropriate, but because there was such a mixed view, there was definitely kind of an acknowledgement that we needed to get further views on this subject, which is why there's a specific area in the explanatory memorandum and specific questions on this. We have been hearing a lot of views back to say, they do think that it should be applied, it should be allowed to be used for, less complex groups. And, so we're really exploring this area in more detail. And we will see, when we get all of the consultation results in and the survey results, where we go with that. But the board is definitely open to kind of changing direction on this based on the feedback that we get.
Yeah, just to add to that also, as I said in my introduction, we had quite a lot of discussion on the authority as a whole, what is a less complex entity and how to define. There is there are views that there are additional complexity in the groups. There may or may not be less complex groups. I think it's some jurisdictions have quite a lot of groups that are really less complex. So we need to hear from those, and we are open to changing our mind. At the same time, as we are developing this project, the ISA 600 is currently being revised and is up for final approval in December. So if we had, if we went about to develop this ED and we're trying to include groups at the same time, we would not have been on an ED stage right now. Then we would have to wait for the final 600 to be included. So this was a way for us to get the standard out and to get the views and to see whether or not we need to include groups back in. And if we are to, then we will base that on the revised principles in the 600 standard. So we have following the same approach. So two views that, yes, some views share that there are complexities. The other one being on the practical side, if we have to include that now, we probably would have still been discussing the authority and the scope, and we would have not been able to get an ED out and to get the views, because that's really what it's all about. We need to hear from you if this approach that we've been working on works or not. So that's the basis, and as Amy said, we are very open to changing the position based on the feedback on the survey. The next hand I see is from Dr. Goodson.
Mr. Godson, you can unmute yourself now. Please go ahead. You can unmute now. We are trying to do this for you, but that does not seem to work. So if on top of your screen you push the microphone icon. Normally you should be able to unmute yourself. Could we maybe in the meantime go to somebody who has another question? Ah, you're there. Please go ahead. Still muted. Maybe while you sort this out, maybe we could go to Oliver Sims. We are allowing you to unmute now, Mr. Sims.
Hi.
Great.
Thanks. I'm getting echo. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I was going to ask about the application of the standard in the public sector, and I know you mentioned this briefly when you spoke at ICAW. So my question is, in the UK, a lot of public sector bodies have unusual balances of some description. So would these sort of unusual balances, a lot of really small bodies, for example, have pension funds, would these unusual balances exclude them from the scope of the standard? And then linked to that, probably a question for Mark, but also other regulators, that in central government there is no audit exemption as such. There is in local government. So would the standard have a role for small central government public sector bodies in the UK, given that?
Do you want me to take that, Kai?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. You can start.
So, I think the point is well made that in the central government sector in the UK there isn't a sort of classification or any sort of audit exemption like that. I think the use of standards in the UK would be a matter for the auditors general who audit the public sector. So at the moment, the auditors general have committed that they will carry out their work in accordance with ISAs, I believe from memory, to the Committee of Public Accounts. So that sort of governs the work they do. I have to say, for someone who spent 20 years of his career at the National Audit Office auditing public bodies, I've used full ISAs to audit entities from as small as £500,000 worth of turnover to as large as HM Revenue and Customs. So, like sort of one of the things that I would say more broadly is that the existing ISAs do allow a tremendous amount of flexibility. But I think the question of how it would apply would be a matter for the Auditors General, and also probably a matter for the Treasury that relies on this information for consolidation into the whole of government accounts.
Thank you for that input, Mark. To respond to the specific question that you also had, Oliver, around if those specific areas would drive you out and how the standard would be applied in the public sector. That is an area or application in the public sector. We see that the authority section that we have written may not be that on spot, so to say, in the public sector. So it is an area where we need to do some more work to identify what the drivers of complexity and how the standard could or should be applied in the public sector area. I think also relating to the other part of your question, that there may be some specific balances with complexity. That is something that we're hearing not only in the public sector, but also in the other area around the area of estimates. We have currently said we've included content for less complex estimates, but if it then become complex estimates, currently you would have to transition to the ISAs. But should there be, so to say, a module in this standard to say how you deal with complex estimates or how that should be done, is something that we've heard ideas of being raised as well. So it is an area where we need to do some more work, both around application in public sector and how to deal with estimates when they start becoming more complex. I think then we can see if we can get the question from Dr. Goodson. Are you able to unmute?
Dr. Godson, we cannot unmute you, so you can only do it yourself, but we have created the possibility for you to do so. So could you please try again? does not seem to work. So not sure, Kai, what we can do about it. Maybe in the meantime, could I ask you a question? You know, we have already had certain references to, you know, this standard whenever it would be finalized and its use, whether national standard setters and regulators would allow for its use. And is there any action that is being taken by yourself or by the IAASB around this? I think it would be, if you can share about this, would be quite good to hear about this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It is an area where we, as I said, are doing some specific outreach, and specifically for the regulatory community. Specifically in Europe, we have had a meeting and discussion with CAOB and some of the other parties that are drivers of some of that in Europe, and we will continue to have. But it is also an area where we need, being in an international environment, we need the help from the accountancy organizations in the different jurisdictions to get the views from the regulatory community in the specific regulation. So that is a challenge that we give to you as well, to start the discussion with the regulatory community in your jurisdiction, and to get their feedback and to get them engaged in the discussion, so we can get those views, because it is difficult for us to reach all of them, and then to make sure that they get the messages through from them. So we are doing work, but we need also help from others in this area.
Good. Thank you very much for that. You know, if we see Monica's hand, but otherwise, you know, we still give the other participant the possibility to come in, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So Monica, maybe in the meantime, we come to you, and then maybe afterwards we can ask Burçak if she would want to come in and make any further comments or final comments from her part after having heard the questions and the debate.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Mark a question, because he's representative in FRC, and we are all looking up to FRC like a benchmark setter for the market. Are you considering proportionality in the inspections that you're doing on audits of, you know, entities under statutory audit regulations, but which are less complex than other entities? When you're checking the auditor's work, are you using proportionality as a principle, or you scale down the way you are inspecting their files? Because I think that if the auditors have to proportion their work, I think also the regulators have to proportion their work and the evaluation that they do in terms of the business that is being audited. Do you agree with that?
Well, any inspection of an audit will always have to reflect the size and the risk and the complexity of the audit itself, and certainly what I would say, and our inspection regime is of course largely focused on public interest entities. The inspection of other entities is a responsibility that lies with the professional accountancy bodies. What I would say in that public interest entity group is that in the insurance sector in particular, although there are some very large insurers, there are also some very small unlisted insurers, where of course, you know, you would by virtue do a lesser, you know, the amount of work that you'd have to do would be less as a result. In fact, one of the things I can also share is that in my time before I joined the FRC, I had the joy of being inspected myself. Once on quite a large audit engagement, but once actually on a very small one. So it does demonstrate that the approach has to flex to reflect the amount of work that's been done.
Thank you. Catherine Bagshaw, I think your hand is up.
You still have to unmute yourself, Catherine. You have the possibility to do so now.
Okay,
And
thank
you
you.
are.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right. Sorry about that. Just to in response to Mark's comments about the inspection of smaller audits by the professional bodies, I don't think there's a sense in which our audit inspectors scale down somehow the ISAs for smaller audits in that they apply lower standards, but I think they do try to be proportionate in their approach. The problem being is that, and this is a different view to the one from Mark, it is that the ISAs are not proportionate, and that is why we have this project in the first place, and practitioners tell us they have to do a great deal of work that is simply not relevant to giving a true and fair opinion, and is more to do with proving to our inspectors as well as FRC inspectors that ISAs have been complied with. Thank you.
It looks like we don't have any other questions in the queue, so perhaps I'll just close off with giving a little bit of information about some of the resources that are available for those that are listening. So we do have a dedicated IAASB website that's available for less complex entities, and so on top of the exposure draft and the explanatory memorandum, we do also have supplemental guidance relating to the authority, which does have quite a few examples and really explains that in more detail, and then also a supplemental guide on auditing reporting. One thing which I do think is useful to point out is that we also have mapping documents, and so they really map ISA requirements through to what, the ISA for LCE. So, did the requirements come over in full? What did things come over modified for the purposes of an ISA for LCE audit? Some things might have been removed entirely, and so you can kind of see that mapping that's there. On top of that, these are also available, the guides and the exposure draft are available in French and Spanish, and we do have some overview videos in English, French and Spanish as well. And on top of that, we have an optional response template for being able to provide your views on the consultation, as well as the survey as well that we've mentioned as a link to that. So just to be aware that is out there if you do want further information on what we're doing and what we have to explain this project.
Yeah, just add to that, we also have a LinkedIn Live series that discuss about the standard. There are a series of 3 different LinkedIn Live sessions that are available, and I think it is helpful for you to getting a review. I think I also saw Buchak's hand going up.
Yes, I think because my name was okay, sorry, excuse me. Just in that moment, my daughter walked in. So life is like that. So I don't really have anything very specific to say, but my name was, I think, called. So I just want to add 2 thoughts. Well, as I think became clear from my remarks, the input that we have received from the banking sector so far seems to be supportive of the initiative. So that's the first reminder. And then digitalization was mentioned, and I think it's important that whatever form and shape this standard takes in the future, it has to be well, either very, very easy to revise all the time, or failing that, it has to be something that fits with an evolving, technologically evolving landscape in terms of professional services. Certainly, digitalization tools are very important for SMEs, we think. Again, I think with sustainability, we will see more and more of a push for digitalized services for SMEs. And here we see the link between financial and non-financial information, because SMEs will have to provide so much information to stay alive in the game, to be a part of the supply chains, and to be a part of the economy, receiving credit and accessing capital markets. They will have to either increase their own internal preparation and structures, which may not be practical in many cases, or they will have to rely on outside services. And I think some of these services will be increasingly digitalized. So that's, I think, important to keep in mind. And I would also offer the thought that I think in the future, the distinction between listing and listed and unlisted will become more and more blurry. That's also something else to keep in mind. Again, with the digitalization of capital markets. Well, we have already seen that over the last 15 years. I mean, I started out my career in Brussels actually with the Prospectus Directive. So all these discussions with, you know, the important trade-offs between, you know, investor protection and the cost for the companies were all part of the political debate, policy debate from the very beginning. But things changed with, you know, crowdfunding and other things. Now, I think we will have more and more different types of offerings for the SMEs. So being not being listed may also change its nature, its character. So we have to keep that in mind. And I'll leave you with that. Thanks again.
Thank you very much for the. I think that the digital thing that we're looking into in the standards overall, and the same with non-financial information, that there is an area with huge developments and we need to move forward.
Okay, Kai, thank you so much. I've got the great pleasure of sharing a few closing remarks with together with Hilda. I'm sure everybody found, just as I did, this event very insightful, and I hope it's persuaded those of you that have joined, whether you're a small practitioner, whether you're a preparer, regulator, that you're going to weigh in and provide some input to this project, because as Salvador Marin mentioned at the outset today, this standard is groundbreaking, and many of us believe that it's the key to the future of the SME or the LCE audit. Kai, I see you as the grandfather or the great champion of this significant initiative. I think it's in great hands. And it was also interesting to hear the insights from around the virtual fireside from Mark, from Burchak and Monica. It's a little bit cold where I am right now. I wish I was standing by that fire along with you. Let me just share a few key points from what I heard from the fireside chat. I mean, Burchak, you shared a view from a key user group of audited financial statements. You broadly welcomed, I think, the ISA, not least because it had the potential to standardize and ensure the consistency of the SME or the LC audit. Mark, you weighed in with a regulatory perspective. You applauded the speed and process of developing the ED, and all that credit, or a lot of that credit, of course, goes to Kai. You did point out that the standard will be used by some jurisdictions, but not all. You did express concerns about the emergence of a two-tier market, an ISA and an ISA for an LCE audit. And you wonder whether the users really understand what they're getting, whether they'll perceive the audit to be, in accordance with this standard, to be inferior to that of an ISA audit. Finally, Monica, you shared a view from an SMP, and I think you raised the temperature at the fireside with your views. While welcoming the clear and concise nature of the standard and its logical flow that mirrors the flow of an audit, You were concerned, just like Mark, with how it will be perceived, whether it will be seen as to deliver an inferior audit to that of the full ISAs. And you feared that that may also cause, it may impair market confidence in the audit, and ultimately create a two-tier market. We had a lot of questions from the audience. I'll only pick on one of them because she's a former colleague of mine, that is Catherine Bagshaw. You've been on this journey, if you like, with me for many years, debating the pros and cons, the need for having a separate standalone audit standard for SME. You welcomed it in principle, felt that it might need significant revision and re-exposure, and you challenged national regulators and the like to convene multi-party fora right now to debate the exposure draft and the place such a standard might have in your national jurisdictions. So what are the next steps? Well, to use tennis parlance, the ball is now firmly in our court, or your court. By that I mean auditors, preparers, SMPs, regulators, professional bodies. It is time to now closely examine these proposals and share your views, frankly, candidly, fairly. I think for SMPs and other auditors of SMEs, this is your standard, so you've got to help shape its outcome by responding to the exposure draft, perhaps using the optional response document, or if you find that too burdensome, responding to the survey that Kai has mentioned. For professional bodies, member bodies of Accountancy Europe, member bodies of EFA, you need to respond as well, and you need to be encouraging your members to respond. And finally, for EFA and Accountancy Europe, it's our job to respond and also to coordinate our response and voice on this very important project. So over to you, Hilda.
Thank you very much, Paul, for those concluding remarks. We're almost there, and indeed, I like to encourage, as you did, all that were at this webinar to respond. We will do so as well. We will definitely have benefited from the input that we got in this webinar for doing so. We are supportive of this initiative. Kai, I want you to feel constructive and positive at the end of this webinar. There are opportunities for sure. There are some challenges to be overcome, but we believe we have to constructively come back to you with comments and be open-minded, like Catherine said. And that is very much what we will try to do, to have this LCE standard to be developed further so that it is fit for purpose, useful in practice, and can actually go to the next steps of being used by auditors wherever appropriate. We actually next week will have an opportunity at the plenary meeting of the CAOB, the Committee of European Audit Oversight Bodies, to talk a little bit about it. So hopefully that will help also for them to consider it in the right daylight. To close on this webinar, I would really like to thank everybody involved. First of all, to the IAASB for doing this work, and for Kai and Amy to be with us today and to lead us through the webinar. I would like to thank all our speakers, Salvador, Paul, and definitely Burchak, Mark and Monica for sharing their insights and their views. And obviously also the EFAA teams and the Accountancy Europe team that have helped to organize this event and to get this to be live today. But first and foremost, or last and foremost, I have to say, I would like to thank all the participants that were here with us today, up to about 130 and quite a lot still there up to now, for sharing your views, for being with us, and definitely also for considering to respond to this exposure draft. And with that, good evening from Brussels and a very good and nice weekend to you. Thank you very much. Bye.